The Feast of the Epiphany, another one of those times where those of us who go to church regularly can fall into the danger of thinking we know the whole story. Why do we need to hear that story again? We already know it so well. In come the Magi, the three kings. Here they are with their gifts of, and everyone could finish once I start, gold and frankincense and myrrh. It feels like just yet another year hearing a beautiful story, but one that is so familiar. We could probably recite it along with Deacon Steve. But it would be a mistake to get too familiar with this story, because the point of this story is a profound one that never goes out of season. And that is that the real gifts of Epiphany were not gold and frankincense and myrrh. Those were beautiful symbols, very nice gestures. But the gift that we celebrate at Epiphany was God choosing to give God's self to us. The greatest gift that God could give is God's own self. And the same is true for us. The greatest gift that we can give another person is ourselves. There is no package that could come in the mail that would mean as much. There is no token, no gesture, no gift, even baked goods, as good as they are. It doesn't touch the gift of giving ourselves to each other. And that's what we're going to focus on today. You may remember that back in the spring, when we were raising money for the annual diocesan appeal we call the Bishop's Appeal, we focused on a goal that we set. We wanted to send 2 seminarians to seminary for a year, to be able, as a parish, to pay for their tuition and their room and board. And I am pleased to tell you that one of those seminarians is here today. His name is Dan McHale. And he grew up right across the river, just a little bit across from New Baltimore, and lived a life that had a lot of highs and lows, just like all of ours, but one that had some prompting going on inside of it. Just like the Magi, he had some very subtle signs, stars and dreams that led him to try to figure out what God wanted him to do with his one precious life. We invite him to come forward now and to share with us a little bit of that story so that we too can understand what it is that God is calling you and me to do with our one precious life.
I want to thank you, Father Scott, and thank you guys here for inviting me into your parish to talk about a very timely topic, and that is vocations. I'm going to share a little of my own vocation story, as well as talk about some things that we can do collectively as parishioners here at St. Patrick's. I want to add also that Father Scott's introduction was a lot smoother than the introduction that I got last year when I gave a vocation talk over in Sacred Heart in Cairo. The older Italian priest, Father Mota, introduced me. And the way he introduced me was, he said, "I assure you he is a follower of Christ, even though he looks like a member of ISIS." So, I can't tell you how nervous that made me, so no nerves here today. So perhaps you've been in churches before where you've heard vocation talks. And I remember hearing them when I was a kid growing up. We went to Nativity St. Mary's in Stuyvesant, and then when I got a little older, when I was a teenager, my family started going to St. Mary's in Hudson, down by the courthouse. And I remember some of the vocation talks that these seminarians then gave. And most of them, I remember talking about how they felt called during childhood, right? I never felt called during childhood, but I did serve as an altar server in St. Mary's, and I later became a lector and a Eucharistic minister. And I remember serving all the way up through my teenage years, even when it stopped being cool, right? You know, when you hit around 14, 15, you don't, who wants to be seen in an alb? But I did. I still wore that alb, and I still served altar. And then I went to Mount St. Mary in Newburgh for school. I wanted to be a history teacher. And so I went down there my freshman year. I was very active in campus ministry there. But I don't know what happened. Somehow in sophomore year, I never stopped believing in God, but I stopped going to church. To the point where the priest, Father Mark Connell, came up to me one day and said, "McHale, what are you now, a Unitarian?" And I said, no, I'm just not interested in going to church. Yes, I would still go on weekends, the weekends I came home, just to appease my parents. But I didn't care enough about God, enough about Christ, enough about salvation. And this continued all the way through my sophomore year into my junior year of college. It was then that I first felt the calling to the priesthood. And it came on all of a sudden. One morning, fall morning, during my junior year, I was laying in bed. It had to be around 6:30 or so. And you know that kind of time in the morning where you still have that veil of sleep over you, but you're somewhat conscious, you're somewhat awake, but you're also somewhat asleep. I heard very distinctly a voice. Now, it was a voice external to myself, but one that was not audible. And it said, "You need to go to Mass." Wait, what's Mass? I haven't been going to Mass. This was a weekday, by the way. I knew they had weekday Mass, but I didn't know where or when on campus, so I got on the computer, looked it up, saw that it was at 12 noon in one of the academic buildings, Whitaker Hall. And on that weekday, after not going to Mass for over a year, essentially, I went to a weekday Mass where I was the only student. It was all the older nuns and some of the professors that were there. And the Psalm antiphon for that day, I still remember thinking, like, why am I here? Why did I listen to this voice, if you will? And the Psalm antiphon was, "You will be a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." I remember, whoa, what's going on, Lord? Am I supposed to be a priest? What's this about? So I actually called that night my pastor in Hudson, Father Bath, and he put me in touch with the vocations here at the Diocese of Albany. And I went to a few vocation events that summer, but as my junior year came into my senior year, I started making excuses. Bless you. And the excuses were, well, I can put this off. I can go to grad school. I can put this off. Why don't I try? I should try dating to see if I'm called to the married life as my vocation first. One girlfriend told me I was, quote, too religious. By the way, that's a bad sign if anybody ever tells you that. Run, don't, yeah. Anyway, so I kept putting it off, to the point where I just didn't want to listen to God. It's like I wanted to shut him out of my life. So I did that. I ran away from that call, that initial voice, for about 10 years. Until we had the call by name. You remember back in the spring of 2014, the diocese ran a program where you parishioners wrote down the names of men. Right? They didn't have to be young men, because we do have a lot of what we call second career discerners today who are in 40s or 50s. They wrote down the names of men who they thought would make good priests someday. And Father Bath in Hudson informed me that my name was one of the ones on the list. So I asked him, I said, was it my mom? And he said, yeah. But there was others as well, okay? So there were other people in the church as well. So I felt like I owed it to them to go to this event. I didn't expect much of it. I was sort of dating a girl at the time, not real serious, but I went to the event. And it was all, a lot of different priests from the diocese telling their own vocation stories to the men gathered there. There were over 100 men gathered there that day. Father Scott was there as well, and he can attest to the following. So After the event, we had dinner at the parish hall up at St. Jude's in Wynantskill. And Bishop Scharfenberger, who had been recently installed as the Bishop of Albany, went by all the tables, and he came to sit down at my table. And the bishop said, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them at this time. And there was a guy across the table from me that asked a question that might as well have been my question, because it was what was on my mind. I was just too chicken to ask. And he said, Bishop, I've been discerning for years. How do I know when it's time to finally take that step and apply to seminary? And the bishop thought for a minute. And he answered, he said, there's an old saying. He said, blank or get off the pot. And I'll let you fill in the blank. And again, Father Scott heard him say that as well. Wait, this is on TV, right? So he's going to know that I'm telling this. But it's funny, you think of something like that, but that was actually what got me to say, well, Lord, I'm gonna pursue this. I'm gonna finally answer your call. You've been knocking at the door for years, and I've just refused to open it for you. So I was admitted to seminary. I was supposed to enter first theology last fall, but I've been dealing with some medical issues with headaches. Fortunately, I'm getting treatment right now, and I feel better than ever. And I will begin my pastoral year in about a week and a half or so up at Mater Christi in Albany. And then I will enter First Theology at Pope St. John the 23rd in Boston in late August. All right, and just a couple of things I want to share with you guys. I'm going to give you all some homework so you don't get off scot-free here. First of all, I want to share good news with you. We presently here in the diocese, despite the overall, we call it vocation crisis in America, I firmly believe the tide is turning, and it certainly has begun to turn here in Albany. We presently have more seminarians and discerners than we've had in 3 decades. We at present have 27 seminarians and also people with the application in hand. So that's 27 men who are committed to this process fully. And we have another 96 discerners. Okay, that's just a few short of 100. Wouldn't it be great to reach that goal, right? But I want to give you some advice from the vocation director in the Archdiocese of Detroit, Father Tim Bierney. He instructs everybody to remember an acronym, and that is what he calls the, quote, vocation pill. Pray, invite, live, and love. Okay, capital P, capital I, capital L, capital L. Pray, invite, live, love. First off, he says, don't be afraid to ask young people about vocations. The average age when a young person first feels called is 16. So that's a junior in high school. Right? I didn't feel called that young, but there are many men and young men and teenagers who feel called earlier. So don't be afraid to approach this subject, right? Furthermore, he gives some stats. 73% of the newly ordained priests from the year 2015 were altar servers before they became priests. So one way you can encourage vocations is to encourage your grandsons, your nephews, your brothers, your friends, to become altar servers. I was an altar server myself as a young man. But the most important stat I feel is this one. Can you personally make a difference? Well, one way you can make a difference, and I know this church has generously contributed to Bishop's Appeal, is by giving to that worthy cause. But the other way you can do it is 30% of the newly ordained priests in 2015 said it was not their moms, not their dads, not a grandmother or grandfather, or aunt or uncle, but a parishioner in the church they grew up in who was the person who most directly influenced their decision to pursue a vocation. So if you know somebody who you think has all of the qualities to make a good priest someday, again, just tell them. Just come right out and tell them. You don't have to be pushy, but just suggest it to them. All right. I do want to close with a prayer. It's a prayer from Pope Francis himself. I will read it. It's a prayer for vocations. Lord of the harvest, bless young people with the gift of courage to respond to your call. Open their hearts to great ideals, to great things. Inspire all your disciples to mutual love and giving, for vocations blossom in the good soil of faithful people. Instill those in religious life, parish ministries, and families with the confidence and grace to invite others to embrace the bold and noble path of a life consecrated to you. Unite us to Jesus through prayer and sacrament, that we may cooperate with you in building your reign of mercy and truth, of justice and peace. Amen. May God bless you. I will keep you guys in my prayers. Please keep, in particular, the 96 guys on that list who have not fully made that commitment. Pray that they decide to take that application and take that step and become seminarians themselves. And thank you very much.